Hi, thank you for joining us for our 5-minute Bible study today. We continue in the book of Colossians. Today we're in chapter 1, and we're going to move forward into verse 21. Now, we had just been in verses 15 through 20, which was a hymn that Paul had given us that the early church used to sing, and now we're moving forward from that hymn. So today we're going to look at verse 21, but it's important to look at 21 through 23 because it is one thought. So we're going to look at that together right now, though we're going to concentrate on verse 21. Let's look at 21 through 23. It says this, "And although you were formerly alienated and hostile in mind, engaged in evil deeds, yet he has now reconciled you in his fleshly body through death, in order to present you before him holy and blameless and beyond reproach. If indeed you continue in the faith, firmly established and steadfast, and not moved away from the hope of the gospel that you have heard, which was proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, was made a minister." So that's the whole sentence. That's the whole context. I did it pretty quickly because I wanted to get through that so you can just hear the context in general. We're going to stick in verse 21 today. So let's look at verse 21 again. It says here, "And although you were formerly alienated and hostile in mind, engaged in evil deeds." So it's a little bit short, but there's a couple of things going on there. The first thing I want you to notice is actually, we're going to look at 21, 22, and 23 really quick because I want you to see this. It says, 21, "And although you were formerly alienated." Verse 22, "And yet he has now reconciled you in his fleshly body." And then continues down in verse 23, "If indeed you continue in the faith." And what you'll notice is that in this section, what Paul's doing is he's turned this back to the Colossians, back to me and you. He's turned this back to us. He's going to apply what he just told us in verses 15 through 20. If you remember, 15 through 20 was the hymn that Paul had sang and given us so that we can see what the early church sang and believed. And that hymn was all about Jesus. It was Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Jesus is the creator. Jesus is the eternal God. Jesus is the head of the church. Jesus is through whom and by whom we are reconciled. So on and on, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And after singing that hymn, after giving Jesus all that praise, what does he do? He flips it over and he remembers, I'm writing this letter to the Colossians. Let's talk about you now. And so he brings it back to the Colossians. And in verse 21, he says, "And although you were formerly alienated." Now, what is he saying there? He's saying, you Colossians, you the Colossian church, you David, you all who are listening in on this, you formerly were alienated. What does that mean to be alienated? Well, if you think of an alien as far as a nation is concerned, somebody who's come from a different nation. They are separated from their old nation. They're now in this new nation. The idea of being an alien is to be separated from something. And in this case, alienated from what? Well, alienated from God. So you were formerly alienated from God. You were formerly separated from him. You were formerly apart from him. You had no way of accessing the Almighty. That's why a lot of people who aren't Christians think about God as somebody who's way out there. He might have created the universe. He might have done these great and mighty things at one point, but today he's just standing out there watching what's going on. He's not involved. And a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, God's so big, he doesn't care about my little problems. That's that God that's way out there. And that's what happens when we don't know God, when we aren't in a personal relationship with him. He becomes something way far away from us. But we aren't alienated anymore. We were formerly alienated from God. And how were we alienated from him? We were hostile in mind, and we were engaged in evil deeds. So notice, there's two things there. There's hostility in your mind, the way you think about things, the way you think about God, the way you think about people, the way you think about the world. It's hostile. Hostile in your mind to God. And what else? Engaged in evil deeds. The things we did were evil. Now, we don't think they're evil. We look at somebody else and we say, well, we're better than that guy. But we can't compare ourselves to the guy next to us when we have God looking down upon us knowing what's right and wrong. So we were alienated in our mind and in our deeds. So everything about us, our thoughts, our works, everything about us against God. That's how we were. Verses 22 will tell us where we are now. So thank you for joining me today for verse 21. Appreciate you being with us. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put those in the comments. I have gotten a couple of questions that we weren't able to get to, so I'll get to those this week. But go ahead and put your questions in the comments. And if you could, like us, share, so that other people can see the gospel, recognize what Jesus has done. And thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate you. God bless you.